New Orleans Restaurants with a Past is made possible by the WIS Producer Circle, a group of generous contributors dedicated to the support of WIS's local productions. Major corporate funding is provided by
beauty and strength. In New Orleans, you can find both in our centuries-old live oaks and in the wrought iron that graces many of our neighborhoods. Whitney Bank, wrought iron strong since 1883.
and by contributions to WIS from viewers like you. Thank you.
I think Antoine's is fun for me because it's old New Orleans. It really is. You get a sense of history. You get a sense of background, of importance. Each different room has a different theme. And so the themes are incredible to just sort of, as you wander through the different themes of the rooms, you're sort of wandering through New Orleans history.
The dock workers and the market workers began their days at 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, and which lunch to us today was dinner to them. And they served this progression of courses, just as we're doing today for dinner.
To have breakfast back in the late 40s, 50s, to have breakfast with 3 courses and an eye-opener and a bottle of wine was just unheard of. Because of the quality and the concept, it just caught on, and ever since then it's been very successful.
Going to Galatoire's is like, well, it sort of reminds me of when I was growing up. Like once a month we would go to a friend's house or the same person's house with the family. Everybody would be there. You would see people you knew. If there was people new in town, maybe you would see them. And that's what it is at Galatoire's. You go there, especially on Sunday nights, Friday afternoons, you're much more likely to encounter an entire restaurant filled with locals then. It's about as nice a way to spend a dinner or an early Sunday supper that I can imagine.
When we took it over, we tried to make it look like it would have looked in the turn of the century. And it still does to this day. I mean, it's a kind of timeless atmosphere.
I'm Peggy Scott Laborde. It's only fitting that in a city that's almost 300 years old, there would be restaurants whose lineage includes a piece of that history. Let's look back at some New Orleans dining establishments, past and present, along with their signature dishes, memorable meals in our memorable city.
My favorite way to do Antoine's is to go in and start with the pommes soufflés, get a half dozen oysters Rockefeller, find out, if you can, what kind of fish is really fresh. And of course, you don't want to eat too much because you want to save room for the baked Alaskan. Also, the Café Brûlot is done so nicely, and they have their own little cups rather than just the Demi-Tasse cups. They have the right Brûlot cups at Antoine's, and it's like you're on your way to heaven, like you're stopping off on your way to heaven to have a nice leisurely supper at Antoine's.
This is a supper that is part of the city's culinary history. In 1840, New Orleans was booming, with its thriving port located on the Mississippi River. Men seeking their fortunes came to this town of great possibilities and needed a place to stay. Antoine Alciator, newly arrived from Marseille, had been a chef's apprentice in his native France. He opened a pension, a boarding house, typical of lodgings at the time, and cooked for his guests. Quickly noticing that the dining aspect of his business could be more lucrative, he opened Antoine's Restaurant, which, over the years, expanded to 15 dining rooms.
Antoine was a hard-working, salt-of-the-earth kind of guy who served elegant food to a Wild Wild West town.
You know, I've always considered Antoine's the New Orleans restaurant. Incredibly, it goes back to 20 years before the Civil War, and its history is just incredible. And I just always thought of watching Gone with the Wind with Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara coming here to New Orleans for their honeymoon, that Antoine's would have been the kind of restaurant they would have eaten at.
The restaurant has the distinction of being one of the oldest fine dining establishments in America.
Oh goodness, Antoine's is my favorite restaurant. I always compare it with it being like going to the opera. If you've never been to the opera in your life and you see an opera in Italian, chances are you're going to miss huge layers of what's going on. And I think Antoine's is that way too. You have to know about it before you can really get into it.
When you walk in, there's a beautiful, very nicely lit room with the cashier sort of station up there. A beautiful room, a room that any restaurant anywhere in the country would be proud to have, where you just walk right through and take a left and go back to what's called the large annex there. Most locals sit in the large annex. That's my favorite place.
We have Antoine Alciator to thank for the restaurant's most beloved appetizer, pomme de terre soufflé, puffed potatoes. He learned how to prepare them from the renowned French chef Jules Collinet.
They are an accident that became a signature. Fried potatoes, if you twice fry them, will puff. And so you get almost like potato balloons, for want of a better way of describing them.
They make little slices, little thin slices of potato, and then they put it in the oil. Then they take it out the oil, and then put it back in the oil, and then it puffs up.
And they are just wonderful, crunchy potatoes with air inside that are really pomme soufflé, soufflé as in to blow. So like you would blow up a balloon, the potatoes are blown up.
Poppy Tooker was taught a local culinary lesson during a business luncheon over 2 decades ago.
I'd order, of course, to start the meal, pomme soufflé. These Frenchmen, they'd never seen pomme soufflé and were quite up to date on food. That's because that is the whole story to me about New Orleans food. Galatoire's, Antoine's, and Arnaud's actually are like food museums. That is where the food of the turn of the last century is perfectly preserved and perfectly served every single day. In France, you see, they continue to evolve their cuisine. But in New Orleans, we just want everything to stay exactly the same.
By the late 1800s, Antoine Alciator's son Jules was next in line to run the restaurant and concocted a dish that he named after a 19th century tycoon, Oysters Rockefeller. Alciator's descendants continue to keep the recipe a secret.
No. Cannot have that recipe. But I'll tell you a funny story about it. When my husband and I were first, really going out together, he said, we're good buddies now. Tell me the secret of Oysters Rockefeller. I said, listen, I like you a lot, but I can't tell you that secret. And then finally we got engaged to be married, and he said, I'm going to marry you. For heaven's sake, tell me the secret of Oysters Rockefeller. I said, well, it's been a family secret all these years. I'm sorry, but I just don't feel like I can tell you. So he thought of it again, perhaps 3 or 4 months after we were married. And he said, heaven's sake, I'm your husband now. Tell me about Oysters Rockefeller. I said, David, I love you more than anything in the world, but I think I'm going to see how you work out before I tell you the secret of Oysters Rockefeller. So it's not a secret I give away lightly.
While it may be confidential, Mrs. Davis's son Rick does share some helpful clues.
Oysters Rockefeller was a dish that Jules Alciator created, and he was actually working on, he was trying to come up with an escargot dish, and he was playing around with the condiments that were served on the tables every night. And so he was fooling around with green onion and celery and initially even some olives and so on, and sauteing those ingredients down with garlic and so on, and trying to come up with a better bouillon sauce. You know, she was trying to improve, was playing with an escargot sauce. And it didn't work on escargot at all, but for some reason he tried it on oysters and said, wow, this is great. You know, this is, but the problem with this dish is it's so rich and there's so much butter in it that we ought to call it Rockefeller. It's just outrageous that it's so buttery, it's so rich.
And to me, it's never been replicated. I've had Oysters Rockefeller all over the world, but whatever it is, that anisette and the wonderful greens that they use in it, Oysters Rockefeller at Antoine's can't be beat.
When Jules Alciator died suddenly, his son Roy found himself in charge of the family establishment.
He had great taste buds, and he would love to have almost personally fixed every plate.
That attention to detail can be found in an Antoine's dessert.
Baked Alaska is my favorite dessert. Never get tired of Baked Alaska. But not many people do it, and I don't think anybody does it as well as we do. That butter pound cake and the delicious, you know, creamy French vanilla ice cream and the meringue that's just, you know, beaten to the perfect texture and then browned, and then all the little decorations. In my father's time, 90% of the time he made the Baked Alaskas himself.
Well, it's a big football size of some kind of ice cream in the middle, and they got these little things that they put, little birdie-looking things that they put on there, you know, and it's a nice way to eat ice cream.
Baked Alaska was a very popular dish about 100 years ago. Kind of went away. You don't see it too much anymore. Antoine's really does the best I've ever had, although not everybody likes it, because I would say it's a little heavy on the sweet side. But you know, that's how people did. People used to cook a lot sweeter than we do now. I've always thought of it as a study in vanilla. Because the two main ingredients there, you have the meringue over the ice cream, and the ice cream is vanilla too. And it's just all this vanilla going on.
And if this dessert opened the door for more temptation, there's a beverage served at the restaurant that's become another signature dish.
It's Café Brûlot Diabolique, and so the devil's brew, in other words. The waiters like to make a big presentation of it because it'll have a big curl of orange peel, and they'll let the coffee run down the orange peel, and they make little sparks, and they do, you know, all kinds of things to make it really exciting.
Dorothy Dix said that a real Brûlot should taste like liquid fruit cake. So, and then of course when they spill it on the tablecloth, which acts as a wick, and the alcohol burns off and nothing else burns. So that's always a wonderful scene.
In 1948, Antoine's reputation spread when then New Orleans-based novelist Francis Parkinson Keyes penned a murder mystery called Dinner at Antoine's.
I was about 13 when the book came out, and oh, it was so exciting, all the parties and the hoopla, you know, about the book.
Good afternoon, Mr. Garraway. Very glad indeed to welcome you to Beauregard.
And Francis Parkinson Keyes was a very prolific writer, and it was a wonderful story about this particular room. It was a murder mystery, and there was a poisoning that took place, and a lot of intrigue, you know, leading up to that, and even more intrigue afterward.
This room is known as the 1840 room and is reminiscent of the restaurant's original dining room. Portraits of Alciator family members grace the walls. While such luminaries as the Russian Grand Duke Alexis Romanov and the Duke and Duchess of Windsor have dined at Antoine's, every year Carnival royalty gathers for organization dinners. One of the several that has a room named after it is Rex.
Rex, that was my grandfather Roy. It was his vision. It was a piece of courtyard behind what we call the large annex, the big red room, and he closed in that piece of courtyard, and the Rex room was built inside.
My most invaluable, special Antoine's memory is that I got married there. Actually, I thought that that was just the spot for a cooking teacher to get married. It was the most festive with the gold and the beautiful colors, and both my husband and I are great Mardi Gras fans. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons I married Nicky was because he was the only man I ever met who would catch a really good parade twice. So it seemed like the king of Carnival's very own dining room was just the spot to say I do.
Each of the restaurant's dining rooms may have their own personality, but the most exotic was literally kept behind closed doors for many years. The Japanese room.
It's designed on a Japanese decor. And it was a big banquet room. It was also a dance hall, a ballroom, big enough to accommodate that kind of thing. It was closed at World War II when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The head waiter here went up and locked the door. They never used it as a room again. Now, why they just didn't call it the Roosevelt room, I'm not too sure. They just keep going. And it is a spectacular interior. It was restored totally accurately. There was no hedging.
In 1937, President Franklin Roosevelt dined at Antoine's, and then New Orleans Mayor Robert Maestri sat next to him.
And it's Mayor Maestri and Franklin D. Roosevelt and a bunch of other nobs and notables sitting at a table at Antoine's, clearly having lunch. And the story was that they sat down, and the lunch started off with oysters Rockefeller, of course, which by that time was already a very famous dish all over the world, not just there. And they started digging into them, and Mayor Maestri is alleged to have said, "So,